The first 4 sessions in this series discuss the benefits of having an organized and sequential approach for teaching the intermediate string player. With this pedagogical method, the string teacher can create a solid technical and musical foundation for the student and avoid skipping over important information that'll be required for his or her future growth. The first session explored the complex set of skills, knowledge, and experiences that a developing string player needs to acquire in order to become a competent musician and creative artist. The second and third parts in this series discuss the use of organized exercises to address specific aspects of the technique, including bow technique. These exercises, along with the ubiquitous scales and arpeggios that musicians need to master, are the basic building blocks of technique. We looked at an organized system of scales and arpeggios in the fourth part of this series. And today's session will explore the importance of providing a good sequence of etudes in order to solidify the technique and facilitate the learning of literature. Etudes expand on the micro-technique of the exercises and the fundamental scales and arpeggios. They begin to put together the technical pieces into musical shapes and should be approached both technically and musically. The repertoire of cello etudes is large and varied, with many excellent studies from which to choose. Besides the famous Popper etudes, which teachers often go to before the student is really ready to handle them, there are great etudes by Duport, Dotzauer, Lee, Francombe, Piatti, Servet in no particular order, as well as by Grützmacher, Kummer, Klengel, Merck, and also contemporary etudes by Minsky and others. And there are also collections of etudes compiled by pedagogues such as Alvin Schroeder. Although I use individual etudes by all of these composers to address specific issues, I prefer not to use the compilation books like the Schroeder because I feel that's sort of the Reader's Digest approach, a little sampling of etudes rather than a deep dive. I like to use a succession of complete etude books in order to immerse the students in a specific technical and stylistic approach by one composer at a time. This next slide is a kind of an overall, very generalized syllabus that I've often used in my pedagogy classes at USC to show future teachers a sequence of etudes and pieces related to the level of technique that a young student might have. We'll look at this closer when we discuss repertoire in the next session. But looking at the middle column here, I basically go from the Popper 15 Easy Studies to the Dotzauer Book 1, using almost all of those etudes, to the Lee Melodic Etudes Book 1. I have the students do all of those etudes. To the famous Duport, I use about half of those etudes. Some of them are just too difficult for this level of student. And then to the Popper Opus 76, doing all 10 of those, to the Francombe, all 12 of the Caprices for a contrasting kind of sound, and finally to the Popper High School Opus 73, and then afterwards to Piatti and Servet. Part of the reason I like this succession of etudes, aside from the fact that these books go in order of increasing difficulty, is that the different styles of the different books introduce the students to a variety of musical as well as technical issues. For example, the Duport etudes are in the style of the late classical period, as opposed to the Francombe, written in 1835, with its early romantic French style, influenced by Chopin, or the Popper, with its late Romantic style, influenced by Wagner, published around 1901. The syllabus of etudes that I use also provides a technical progression from easy to difficult in a way that helps the young musician grow organically in a slow and healthy manner. I've noticed that some teachers assign difficult Popper etudes to students when they're not yet ready to handle the complexities of these etudes. The result can be frustration and occasionally actual physical harm. In addition, the students are stuck on one etude for a long time as they try to come to terms with the difficult challenges. This then breeds an overall dislike of etudes, resulting in their reputation as the cod liver oil of technique. When etudes are presented to the students as a regular part of their musical diet, when the students are working on etudes at their level or a bit challenging, when they move through them easily and quickly because they have the technique to conquer them, and when they realize the benefits that accrue from working on them, then etudes become more like the daily habit of brushing one's teeth. Here are some of the procedures and protocols I use for teaching etudes. First of all, I expect my students to be working on 2 etudes every week. One of these assigned etudes is new, and the other is what I call a playthrough, in other words, a performance. So a new one and an old one each week. This pattern helps the students to progress quickly through the syllabus of etudes. In the first week of practice, the students sketch the new etude for the next lesson. This means that as they practice, they write in any information that will help them play it. Fingerings, bowings, positions if needed, and dynamics, etc., etc. They also write in the tempo at which they're currently playing it, as well as the goal tempo as they imagine it as it should be eventually played. They should know the meaning of all the words that are in the music, looking them up in the dictionary if necessary. I rarely tell the students the meaning of musical words or foreign terms. I feel that it's better for them to look them up and read about them as part of the process of exploration. I want to set standards of reasonable expectations for what students can do in 1 week of practicing. Learning becomes more meaningful through their own active discovery of the information rather than passively hearing about it from me. In addition, they should be able to verbalize what the etude is about, meaning the technical and/or musical issues that are the focus of the etude. The second etude each week, the old one, should be practiced during the week as a playthrough for the lesson. This means that it's a real performance of the etude with no stopping or mistakes. In this way, students have weekly opportunities to experience the focus and concentration required for performing. This is also part of the continual process of becoming more comfortable with playing for people. The point of these playthroughs is not necessarily a perfect performance, but one that demonstrates a good command of the technical issues involved in the etude. Therefore, it's very important that the etude be within the technical grasp of the student. It should be challenging, but not too difficult for the student to be able to master within a short period of time. It's psychologically important to help build the student's self-confidence by passing off these etudes on a regular basis. In doing so, students obtain a sense of accomplishment and can recognize that they're getting through a lot of material. If the playthrough is not successful, or if the technical issues have not been completely absorbed, then I'll ask the student to live with the etude for another week, focusing on the specific problems that need to be addressed. If the problem is just that there are too many little blips in the performance, I sometimes ask the students to videotape themselves and send me the video by Dropbox or YouTube. The advantage of this method is that the students will see and hear their own performances and will usually record the etude multiple times before sending it to me. As a result, they'll solve their own problems and set their own standards to a higher level. Some of the etudes will be studied for longer than just 2 or 3 weeks. If they're to be perfected to be performed in a cello class for their colleagues, or in a college jury at the end of the semester, or as a memorization project, they'll likely need to be massaged for a longer period of time. For some of the more challenging etudes, I'll tell the student that we'll return to the etude in a few weeks or months after letting it lie fallow for a while. This is important in addressing some issues in which students have reached a temporary limit in their ability to master the technique. In other words, velocity or specialty strokes or some intonation issues, etc., etc. For my college students, the syllabus requires that they pass off a certain number of etudes each semester, and their grade depends on it. This ensures that they're moving forward with learning new etudes throughout the semester. For example, for a BA bachelor's cello major as a sophomore at USC, I required at least 8 etudes in the first semester and 9 in the second semester. A music education major might have had somewhat fewer required etudes, maybe 7 in the first semester and 8 in the second semester. So we don't have time today to go through many of these etude books, but I did want to spend a bit of time with the Dotzauer and Lee etudes because I think that they're often overlooked and they really set up the students for the more difficult etudes that come after. I often start my pre-college students with the Dazauer Book 1, even if they're already somewhat more advanced as players. These etudes address many of the fundamental technical issues and build on the concurrent work of the Feuer and many other exercises. They cover so many of the basic issues that a young cellist needs to know. For the right hand, these issues include tone production, bow distribution, bow strokes, string crossings, etc. And for the left hand, these include recognition of scales and arpeggios within a piece, velocity, shifting, and of course, intonation. And they deal with musical issues, such as different meters, different keys, dynamic issues, etc. The Dazauer etudes also challenge the student's ability to concentrate for longer periods of time, since many of the later etudes in the book are 2 pages long. Every one of the Dazauer etudes has a point, either technical or musical. So besides playing the notes correctly, the student needs to figure out, with my help of course, what the main issue is and what the etude is about. We don't have time to go through the whole Dazauer book, but I want to take a few examples of these Dazauer etudes to show some of the benefits. I usually don't start right at the beginning of the book, especially if the students are at the intermediate level. I often start with number 16 because that's both technically and musically challenging. I can learn a lot about a student's level and what they need to work on from this etude. And if they're not able to play it well after 1 or 2 lessons, then I might want to go back to some of the etudes before. In number 16, I'm especially interested in hearing if they've understood the concept of a core sound, which we explored in the first 2 lessons, and if they're able to play close to the bridge when needed. They also need to be able to control dynamics and making a crescendo towards the tip, and of course, how well they understand the rhythms. So in the first lesson, I would demonstrate a little portion of the etude just to show something about tempo and style. One of the main issues in this etude is to coordinate the left-right motion with bow distribution, using full bow for the half notes in the beginning, and then using the lower part of the bow and the upper arm for the dotted rhythms in the second measure. This concept goes along with the work that the students are doing in the Feuer bowing exercises, and it reinforces those concepts and ensures that the students are transferring the technical ideas into an etude and then eventually into a piece. So full bow, upper arm, drop, full bow, upper arm, full bow, full bow. In this etude, it's also important to make sure that the student understands the difference between the 2 kinds of dotted rhythms in this etude, the legato dotted rhythms versus the dotted rhythms, or staccato dotted rhythms. For example, legato dotted rhythms and dotted. And then at the end, I would suggest interpreting the pesante by going up the C string and playing forte with the accents. I would also explain that next week I would want to know what the student thinks is the goal tempo, as well as the tempo he or she is actually playing. The students need to write the goal tempo in a box at the top, and then their actual tempo on the left side of the page. Then the following week, I hear the student playing this etude for the first time, I can already get a sense of what the most important issues will be: the dotted rhythms, the pulse, the left-hand issues or dynamic issues, or even understanding the various words that are here, including maestoso or crescendo or WB for whole bow or pesante, etc., etc. So here's an example of a student's music after working on it for 2 weeks. Notice the tempo is written on the left side as she got it faster. There's even a spot towards the end where she has the numbers down the side of the page as she was working to speed that little section up. Notice also the box with the goal tempo that she wrote and the backwards quarter note. But remember, this is the first etude she's working on with me. So all through, she probably wrote in a bit more information than she really needed. But I prefer that to not writing stuff in and seeing her thinking as she was practicing. After number 16, I often go right on to number 17 because that's so contrasting in sound. This one is slower and more gentle than number 16, but still uses a full core sound. It's almost a minuet in 3 with the quarter note, but it could be thought of in 1 with a dotted half as the pulse. In any case, it's good to be able to talk about how the mood changes a bit by how we use the concept of a pulse, whether we think in 3 or in 1. The main goal here is to use the full bow and get a crescendo on the down bow using bow speed, and then a diminuendo on the up bow, again using bow speed. The other main point here is finding the phrases and finding the dynamic contrasts in the piece. I often talk about creating a story in this etude, maybe like the famous Hobbit books, where they start out gently at home next to a fireplace, and then going on an adventure with some excitement, and then gradually returning home like in the beginning. So instead of just a technical etude, this number 17 has some nice musical issues. If I find that the students are not able to move quickly through these two etudes and need more remedial work on the fundamentals, then I'll often go back to some of the earlier Dottsauers. For example, numbers 11 and 12 show the important difference between 3/4 and 6/8 meters. This will be seen numerous times throughout the Dottsauer, but it often takes a while to have this important concept sink in. As I mentioned, every one of the Dottsauer etudes has a point, and I do go through all of them after numbers 16 and 17. We don't have time to look at all of them, but I want to mention some of the other important ones. For example, number 18. This one would provide a good focus on what I call the brushy off the string stroke, which is basically a kind of spiccato, but with a bit more length for resonance. This is a good opportunity to recognize that there are many kinds of spiccato strokes. They're not all the same. Etude number 19 is one of the first of the two-page etudes, so there are issues of concentration that have to be addressed. And this etude is quite a bit more challenging than the earlier ones. But again, it's really a matter of putting together some of the issues that have been addressed previously and in the Foyard bowing exercises. The crescendo on the down bow and the diminuendo on the up bow. The left-right motion, the bow distribution, and using a lower contact point for the many notes, remembering the rule, the more notes in a bow, the lower the contact point. This is also a tricky piece for rhythm, as well as an understanding of pulse and the subdivision of the beat. Etude number 20 is a perpetual motion or moto perpetuo type of piece. I use it to discuss détaché strokes in the middle of the bow with the lower arm. As with all the etudes, I ask for a goal tempo in a box at the top at whatever tempo they can play it until they match their goal. Etude number 22 uses a real spiccato stroke with an active upper arm and a passive wrist. The key goal for the student is to understand that this is in 6/8 meter. They'll often play it incorrectly as if it were in 3/4 with 4/16 notes to the pulse, as opposed to playing sextuplets with a dotted quarter note to the pulse. This is a good opportunity to again discuss the differences between 3/4 and 6/8 meters. They may or may not have completely understood the difference yet, but there are still a few more 6/8 etudes in the book, and by the time they finish the Dots Hour, this concept will be firmly understood. Skipping a few of the etudes for now, though I really don't skip any of them since they all have important pedagogical issues. The next one, number 27, has several different issues. First of all, the legato parts of the first measure with the string crossings, and then the flying spiccato stroke, which they would have encountered from the four bowing exercises. So we have So there are major string crossing issues here to work on smoothness. I usually explain that in order to play legato string crossings, one has to think about the way pianists play legato all the time. There's a slight overlap of the two notes that gives the impression of legato. Some of the important work on this etude, by the way, involves intonation. I asked the students to go through the string crossing passages playing double stops and ask them to be able to play the intervals and tell me what they're playing. That means they'll have had to work this out at home, making sure that they know and hear the intervals correctly. So in measure 13, we have and then I asked them to play this as double stops. And then to play them as double stops and tell me the intervals as they play. Minor 7th, minor 6th, minor 7th, major 6th, major 7th, major 6th, minor 6th, tritone, perfect 4th, 3rd, minor 6th, tritone, perfect 4th, minor 3rd, minor 6th, 5th. The other major issue in this etude is the many notes in a bow, being able to get a good sound by playing with sans filet close to the bridge. Etude number 31 is basically just a series of arpeggios in compound meter. I usually ask the students to write in the keys. Many of the students have not had much music theory background, so I explain how to figure out the keys by stacking the notes in thirds and looking at the bottom note, and ask them to pick out the major and minor arpeggios. If they've had a little theory already, I ask them to find the dominant sevenths as well. This kind of analysis is important for when they start playing Bach, so it's good for them to have had this experience at this point. The other playing issue here is the crescendos on the down bow and the diminuendos on the up bows, which is consistent throughout this etude. For etude number 33, I asked for a kind of brushy off the string stroke. This piece starts with an appoggiatura before the beat and is again in 6/8 meter. But this time they'll have had a lot of experience with compound meters, and it should have become easy to work with the dotted quarter note pulse and the eighth note subdivisions. Etude number 34 is probably the most challenging etude in the book. It has mordents, some complex rhythms, and slurs. Students should first practice at thinking 6 eighth note beats per measure. Once the student reaches 120 to the eighth note, they can convert it to 40 to the dotted quarter note. Doing the math and understanding the compound meter is often tricky for students. So first, at 120 to the eighth note. And then 40 to the dotted quarter note. The other issue in this etude is making a crescendo and decrescendo in every measure, with the loudest part in the fourth eighth note. Every one of the Dot's Hour etudes has a pedagogical point. Some of them are quite obvious and others less so. As I said, we don't have time to go through all of the etudes, but if you're interested in seeing a brief description of what I consider the goals for each one, we'll put in the chat a document with a few pages about the Dot's Hour Book 1 etudes from a dissertation that a former DMA student of mine wrote on the sequential approach. The entire dissertation by Kalim Campos is available on my website. In contrast to the Dot's Hour etudes, the Lee etudes are much shorter, and although they include many technical problems that need to be solved, they're probably somewhat more enjoyable on a musical level. I use these etudes to focus on various interpretive topics, such as tone color, phrasing, shaping lines, and style. Each etude has a specific pedagogical focus, in addition to the obvious technical and musical issues. Teachers often overlook this when working with etudes, resulting in students missing important opportunities to learn more about phrasing and dynamics through the etudes. Sebastian Lee was a German cellist and pedagogue. He was principal cellist of the Grand Opera Orchestra in Paris. Lee's melodies are essentially classical in style, and they provide an opportunity to explore classical phrasing in shaping musical lines. The classical concept of beauty traces back to the ancient Greeks with the golden section, or phi, 0.6, or the rule of thirds. It shows up in architecture, in art, and in music, as well as in nature. Classical beauty contains both symmetry and balance. One of the best examples in architecture is the Parthenon. In music, the phrases have a high point and a low point, and they should be identifiable, and they usually have a fairly simple dynamic shape without as many wiggles in the line as may be found in romantic phrasing. That's one of the main differences between classical and romantic phrasing. The direction of the musical line is not necessarily towards the highest note in the phrase, but the high point is often slightly past the middle, in keeping with phi, or the rule of thirds. For example, in Lee Etude number 1, the first phrase is 4 measures long. I ask the students to play the phrase and try making the line work by going to different notes as the top of the phrase. For example, if they chose the C in the second measure, then they should crescendo up to the C and then diminuendo all the way to the end for a simple phrase structure. That obviously doesn't work. After several experiments, perhaps phrasing to the high D in the second measure or the last F, they'll often decide that the best phrasing is to crescendo to the open D in the third measure and then diminuendo to the end. That still doesn't quite work, and at that point I'll play the phrase for them, showing them how a crescendo to the F in the third measure works slightly better, since it keeps the motion going slightly longer and increases the tension slightly. I then point out that this is the rule of thirds again, at approximately the 2/3 point in the phrase, which is typical of classical phrasing. The next step is to recognize how the first phrase group of 16 measures includes 3 phrases consisting of 4, 4, and then 8 measures. Each phrase within the group has its own classical shape, but the entire phrase group works together with the point of arrival at the E flat in measure 15. In other words, the third phrase in the group does not consist of just two measure mini phrases followed by a 4-measure extension, but rather it's a long phrase that culminates in the arrival of the C in measure 17 and the return of the first phrase. Again, the rule of thirds. At this point, the student should write in the dynamics for the entire etude as part of the sketching assignment and be able to point to the emotional peak of the entire etude, which happens to be about 2/3 the way through the piece, in keeping with the golden section, so around 36 out of 60 measures. Next, I want to go through a few of the Lee etudes with a summary of some of the important concepts that I try to teach. In Lee Etude number 2, the phrase groupings are 2, 2, and 4 measures, proportionally similar to the first etude, which was 4, 4, and 8. And there are simple crescendo decrescendos within each phrase, similar to Etude number 1. And measures 25 to 32 should be practiced as double stops again, identifying intervals and writing in arrows to indicate high or low pitches according to the principles of expressive intonation, similar to what we did in Dot's-Hour number 27. So this etude solidifies what was accomplished in the first etude and in the Dot's-Hours. As with all the etudes in Lee, dynamics should be written in throughout according to principles of classical style. Etude number 4 is indicated as a scherzo, which means, of course, a joke, but the form is actually a rondo. Students should figure out the actual form A-B-A-C-A-D-A-C coda. This etude provides an opportunity then to discuss the background of the scherzo as well as the rondo form, and is probably the first time that students become aware of form as an issue in music. Later Lee etudes in this book will deal with various other forms, as we'll see. The question in this etude, then, is what is the joke? Here's what I think. So I think, of course, it's the flying spiccato stroke, which sounds like ha, 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 ha. You can make up your own joke, of course. Etude number 5 has again the 2-2-4 phrase structure, very typical for Lee and for classical style. Crescendos on the down bow towards the second measure, with the peak after the bar line, and decrescendo on the up bow. So then the question is, where is the golden section for the entire etude? If you play it, you'll probably find it around measure 53, which is almost exactly 2/3 of the piece, 53 out of 77 measures, or again, similar to the rule of thirds. The next question is how to treat the ending. For me, it's a typical fading away situation, which is also common for many of these Lee etudes and for much music of this style and period. I want to make sure that the students start to get the concepts of marching off into the distance or fading out or diminuendoing at the end of a piece. These concepts might be totally obvious to experienced musicians or teachers, but at some point they have to be pointed out to students so that they notice these things and are aware of these issues. The Lee etudes present a wonderfully sequential approach to teaching these concepts. The next few etudes, numbers 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, all have particular issues: classical versus romantic shifts, sustaining notes over the bar line, string crossings, etc. Each of them is in a different key: A major, E flat major, G major, B minor, D major, and F major, etc. This is a good opportunity to discuss the different affects of different keys, and overall, the student should try to recognize the different sound worlds for each and provide descriptions of tone and mood using metaphors, colors, stories, etc. So, for example, number 6 in A major should have a very open kind of sound. I usually describe it as flying over the flat plains of the central part of the United States, over Kansas or Iowa. I always ask the students to come up with their own stories, but then I usually tell also mine. So number 7 in E flat reminds me of a big water wheel attached to a mill that keeps going around and around. Of course, I give them a more complete description so they see what I mean. Number 8 reminds me of a circus. And for number 9 in B minor, I talk about other weighty pieces that are in that key. For example, the Dvorak Concerto or the Bach B minor Mass. For number 10, I have a story about cow tipping. It's too complicated to go into here, but it helps with finding the surprise dynamic places in the piece. Finally, in number 11, I see little cats jumping in and out of a basket. Obviously, you can make up your own stories, and the students often come up with great ones. The idea is that they use their creative right brains as well as their analytical left brains when working on etudes or any music. Lee etude number 12 works with the sautelier stroke, which the students have been using in their scales, as I described in the last session in this series. They also visited this stroke in the four-yard bowing exercises, which I discussed in an earlier session as well. So by the time they work on this etude, they understand how this stroke is produced technically. Now they have to figure out how to make it work musically. The phrase structure is once again 4, 4, and 8 measures. Measures 74 to 89 contain 4 4-measure phrases that are a sequence based on the interval sequence octave, sixth, tritone, third, and should be practiced as double stops. If the students cannot grab the octave, they should work on overextensions to broaden the hand and increase flexibility. Lee Etude number 13 provides a nice opportunity to discuss variation form, pointing out how the composer creates the variations from the theme. This is another of the forms that Lee presents in these etudes, and it may be the first time that students will have played some variations. I usually ask the students to listen to other variation pieces, including Mozart's À vous dirai-je ma main and Dochnagny's Variations on a Nursery Tune, Opus 25. I don't tell them the relationship of the Dochnagny to the Mozart, but want them to experience the emotional contrast between the ominous, dramatic opening of the Dochnagny to the presentation of the theme in the piano. And then we discuss what composers do to create variation movements. In this etude, there are 3 variations and a coda. And one of the issues is finding how the tempos might work between the variations, possibly with each one getting a faster pulse. I also ask them to find the hidden theme in the various variations. In Lee number 16, I talk about the sound concept that we want here. I discuss messa di voce and the sound of a portative organ. I point out the similarity in mood to the opening of the prelude of the second Bach suite. Lee Etude number 17 is filled with possibilities for exploring polyphonic voices, as in Bach. I discuss terrace dynamics and ask the students to write in clearly where the voices change, possibly using slashes to show the different voices, even in the middle of what may seem to be one continuous musical line. For example, in this spot, the voices change throughout the etude, and it's interesting to hear what the students come up with in their own interpretation. Since this is a somewhat long etude in E-flat, I asked them to think of it as a training etude for the 4th Bach suite. Lee Etude number 18 is one of my favorites. It's similar to a Rossini overture with an operatic largo and an allegro with a fast sautelier stroke. I asked the students to listen to several Rossini overtures in order to understand the style. Cenerentola or Cinderella, The Barber of Seville, Italian Algiers, etc. Number 21 is the first Lee etude that incorporates all the registers of the cello and uses tenor clef as well as treble clef. Students will have been doing 3- and 4-octave scales and arpeggios by this time, and so they're already used to changing the contact point as they go up higher on the instrument. They'll also have done 1-octave thumb position scales and arpeggios, but they haven't experienced going in and out of thumb position. So this etude is the first one that explores those issues. So at this point, we're running out of time for today's session, and I would still like to leave some time for questions or discussion. But I did want to include some information about the next etudes that I would use in my sequence, the Duport etudes. So I'm going to do a separate short video talking about Duport etude number 11 as a kind of bonus video. Before we stop here now, I want to ask for your help for our next session, which will be on repertoire. I'd like for this to be a kind of participatory session, and I want to ask for your ideas about repertoire that's less commonly known or taught. There are many wonderful lists of pieces in the ABRSM or the Royal Conservatory or the ASTA lists, but I thought we could use the time in the next session to actually show some examples of intermediate level pieces that are less well known and less commonly taught. Please send me some links to either a YouTube performance or send me a short video of you or your students performing, and I'll share it here next time. You can send it to me at rjesselson@mozart.sc.edu. Thanks again for listening, and now let's go live with any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jesselson. And if you haven't met me before, I'm Eric Edberg in the United States, helping with the Zoom aspects. Everybody now has the ability to unmute yourself and also to turn on your video, so please do so if you'd like. And we want to open the floor for questions and answers session with Bob for about the next 10 minutes.
And let me just repeat what I said in that video about the Dupor. So we'll put in the compilation that Selma usually puts there, the email and so forth. We'll send links to that Dupor bonus video about especially about teaching number 11, which is the first etude that I do in the Dupor, and I use it to show how to go about practicing hard spots in pieces and etudes and so forth. And so that'll be a kind of bonus video, and we'll have also, I think we're sending also the Lee Etudes book in case you don't have that, and the Dotzauer book, and then of course there'll be a copy of this video in that links to this video in the message that Selma will send. So, but I'm curious on how people thought about the quality. By the way, we did this by Zoom. This is the first time I think that we've used Zoom like this with the video. I don't know how many of you actually watched it on Zoom, and did any of you find it wasn't good enough, and so you went to the link that was provided? Just curious reactions from you all.
I thought it was fine.
If you thought it was fine, then I'm happy.
Yeah. I watched it on Zoom. It was good. Yeah.
Okay. You watched on the Zoom or on the link? The Zoom, yeah. Eric did some magic work on working with the levels, which were not 100% after I made it. It's a lot of technology to put together that kind of session, but Eric was fantastic in helping to make that work better.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
So any questions, thoughts, disagreements? I love disagreements.
Well, I would like to add to your very complete list of etudes the Franchomme etudes. You've put in the caprices, but you have not put in the etudes, which I think are easier than the caprices. The caprices are quite challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the etudes make a good introduction to the different bow techniques of the French school.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, the French have a slightly different concept of sound. And so there's a lightness to the touch. And there's also what they call that French stroke piqué, which is that ability to get the string to respond very quickly with a short, sharp stroke. And they cultivate that. And Franchomme Etudes helps to introduce the French school and the differences from the Dotzauer and the Germans and the Lee too.
Absolutely. I mean, the lovely thing, the wonderful thing about our repertoire is there is a vast repertoire out there, and it's a matter of choices. Yeah, it's great to be able to have a variety of things to choose from. Speaking of the Franchomme, I always point my students to there's a wonderful CD. I can't think of the name of the cellist now. He's a Belgian cellist who did
Yes,
two.
that's Roel
Yeah,
Deeltines.
exactly, Rolf. That's exactly what I was thinking about.
Yes,
And
he's done a marvelous thing. Yeah.
his sound is so, and it's a duo. I mean, there's two cellists, but especially him. The sound is so, so French and so wonderful, and
Mm.
I love my students to listen to that.
It's called Le Violoncelle Virtuose, so the virtuoso cellist, and it has, I think, exclusively Franchomme, but not exclusively the caprices and etudes. It has a variety of other pieces of Franchomme, which are
Right.
really worth exploring.
Yeah, I think there are about five of the caprices in there,
Hmm.
and I love for the students to be able to work on it themselves and then listen to that and go, oh yeah, okay,
And the other thing that's worth mentioning is that there are editions of both the etudes and the caprices for two cellos.
right,
So you can play them. In my class, we just completed, well, almost completed. We're working on the third year of both volumes with other class cellists. So it's called a Franchomme project, and I've put together cellists from different classes at Junior Guildhall, and then they play them, they perform them downstairs in a pop-up concert.
Mm.
oh,
And so it's very good for the students to themselves practice them and work out the details between themselves. It's very motivating. It's not just playing it with a teacher, but you can play it with another fellow cellist.
great.
One of the things I was struck by is
Can I
you
can I
reinforce.
can I just say, if you want to see a few more faces, you've got to enable the video because I can't do it.
Say that again.
The video is disabled by you. If you want, just in case you want to see a few more faces.
Everybody should be able to. I'll
No, I
just double check
can't.
here.
I
Turn on their
can't.
own video. Yes, right.
It's disabled by the host.
I'm sorry. I've enabled the permission for everybody to start their
I
video.
can't start it, I'm afraid.
Okay, let me see if I can do it for you. Uh, try it now. There you
Okay.
go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you do
Eric,
the same for the audio, Eric? Can you enable audio for everybody?
Yes, you just have to turn it on yourself, but we've changed the settings so that participants can unmute themselves and turn on their video. If
The
if
audio's
Okay.
okay.
if you're having any problem turning on your video, raise your electronic hand and I'll manually do that. Or I'll just ask everybody to do that. While I am doing that, let me say, Bob, what I thought was really helpful that you pointed out is that in assigning the etudes, to have them be something that the student can do well in 2 weeks. So, and that the etude is only like a slight challenge. So it's an accomplishable challenge. So you have that feeling, okay, I'm accomplished something, I'm winning,
Yeah.
which is so important to keeping motivation going.
yeah, psychologically, that's really important, right? And also just knowing that they are going to be doing two etudes every week, that sort of
Yeah.
discipline, self-discipline. We as teachers, if we're teaching somebody, need to maintain that sort of standard and that schedule. And if we kind of slack off on it, then they're going to slack off on it. So it's a vicious cycle if one doesn't, and we have to keep it kind of going. That's why the two etude thing works for me.
Yeah. And I am now manually asking everybody to start their video, and you don't have to, but it should allow you to do it if you have been trying to. And some people are saying they're going to start their video later, and that's fine. So,
I know a lot of people want to leave in a couple of minutes. We're sort of running out of time, but are there any burning questions or things that you want to talk about?
I just found a nice edition of those Lee studies, which does actually have a second cello.
Yes.
Someone has written one. That's been quite fun to be able to play along.
Yeah.
and also those Duport etudes, there are additions with the second cello part, which are really nice.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I hope someone will do it for the dots though, because I do find them a bit dull, to be honest.
Oh.
I would like to mention the two cello version of the Popper, which we had a special presentation about no, it was before we became the British Cello Society. And it was done by the president of the French Cello Association, Xavier Gagnepin. And you can find it on YouTube. I'll send you actually the publisher's link to it because it's really worth purchasing to be able to do the Popper High School with a second cello part. And he
I think
came and presented an event.
if that's the edition that I looked at, there are a couple of different editions of second cello parts. There's one that I don't know if it was that one. The second cello part was as hard as the first cello part.
Well, I don't know which one you saw, but this is a recent edition. It's a French publication,
Okay.
but it's exquisite. It's beautifully done. It's beautifully harmonized. It is not easy, but it's not as hard as the first part, obviously. So I will make a note to send a link to that publication.
Of course, you probably noticed that back there on my stand is Selma's edition of the Bach with the second cello part in her three.
Oh, but those are not etudes.
Not etudes. No, we'll talk about it next time, right? Okay. But as long as
Thank
you're
you for-
mentioning duets,
Yeah, thank you for the
little
plug.
plug there.
Thank you also for presenting the Lee in that concise manner and talking about the musicality of each of the etudes, because it's my view that an etude is not just an etude, it's a piece of music.
Yes.
And I always say to my students that when they practice them, if they practice them looking for the music they're in, they've got two rewards for the price of one. One is the technical challenge, but the second is to look for the music within. And you certainly hear that when you listen to Chopin etudes or you listen to Schumann etudes. In a higher level, a composer like Chopin or Schumann looked at the etude as a musical challenge. And I think that that's what they are. Even one of the leads that you played was so beautiful. I thought to myself, this is really worth giving to a student just to understand how to create structure and as a container for the beauty in it.
Yeah.
And,
I
and
often tell
so
my
much-
students that don't play your etudes like an etude.
That's right.
And also, I just think Lee is, at least in a current cello culture, often overlooked. There's just so much beautiful melodic and harmonic structures in Lee, from the very simplest to more advanced things, and really deserves to be done more.
And he really also covers so many of the different forms that we use. So I'm sometimes surprised, fairly advanced student, even coming to college, who I'll ask, so what's the form of this piece? And they've never really thought about it, particularly of pieces they play. They may have even taken a class in formal analysis, but they don't know, all the varieties, ABA or AB or variation form or scherzo or whatever, all these different things. And Lee presents all of those things in those little
That's
etudes.
right. Yeah.
I have a question. Do you have any favorite etudes that aren't terribly difficult, but involve thumb position, but don't base it on the halfway harmonic? Studies for starting to move your thumb into different places. Obviously, you can do it very easily by just transposing scales and exercises, but actual etudes that do that.
That's a great question. Wow. Yeah, most of that literature does sort of go. You're talking about the thumb then on the A and the D halfway, right?
Yeah,
Other-
moving off that back to a C, or
Yeah.
up, or
Obviously, Popper does that. Even the Popper Opus 76 does that. The Franchomme do some a little bit, but it is not a great progression. That's a great question. Never really thought about that.
yeah, it's suddenly sort of very complicated, isn't it? When when that does arrive.
Yeah. Well, there are some teachers who actually start with thumb position. Start young kids with thumb position. And in some ways that makes a lot of sense because it's sort of easier. You can see the whole and half steps easier, and in some ways the tone production is easier, not great then, but yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great thought.
I have one suggestion if you're interested in looking at Motz's Etudes. There is a book called 24 Etudes Connecting Neck Positions to Thumb Positions. So he started with a simple D major etude in first position, and then he takes it right up the exact same notes into thumb
Yeah.
position. And then he gets more complicated as it goes along, so the challenges are a bit greater. And one of my students is just starting on that now. But it's a book that I've used for many years, and it's really worth putting on your list as maybe an accessory.
Great, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and that also helps so much, that particular book, because you first play in first position, where it's easy to find the notes and get into the student's ear what it's going to sound like. Then you go up to thumb position, and they know what it should sound like, and play it up there. And I have found that set of etudes to be really helpful in the early stages of thumb position.
Definitely.
They still do always have the thumb on that harmonic there, I think. I mean, they do many different keys and
Yeah.
rhythmic challenges and things, but it is always that
Yeah, I think
thumb
that's,
position.
yeah. Yeah, I don't think we mentioned, there's a Badenchan set of etudes that do are based in one thumb position, starting with your thumb on E and A on the A and the D strings. And there's I think 12 of them. And the first few stay within one position. And then as you progress, they start to shift around more. And I don't think those are on IMSLP, but they are published by Writer, and I can look up what the exact title is. But they're often, when students are getting grounded, let's say you've got your thumb on C and G on the D and A strings. It can be really great to kind of get set in that position.
That's nice. Could you put that in the chat or send it to me and I'll include
I'll
it
send
in
it to you. I'll look up the exact title because there's a lot of pedagogical works by Badenchan that are available for free on IMSLP, and I think this is not one of them. So I will send that to you.
So I'm not even familiar. Badenchan, you said?
Badenchan, yes.
I'm not even familiar with him. Huh. Great, thanks. I'll be looking into that. As we said, there's so much material. It's great. We don't need to stick with just the same old, same old. As long as there's a good logic, I think. And again, the sequential idea to what you're doing, not just random kind of thing. And Josh, then what I was thinking about is, in answer to your question, also is that by the time the students are starting to get into the dupor. So towards the end of the lead, they're already, in terms of my scale system, they're probably doing thumb position scales going up by the half, so the way I described in the last session on scales. So they're experimenting with all of the different thumb positions then, not etudes, but just playing the scales, the one octave scales and arpeggios in those places, in those positions. So it's not doesn't cover the etude problem.
Thank you both.
Anybody else?
If there are no further questions, may we thank you all for the wonderful presentation, as always, such a high level, and we learn so much from the way that you present this material. It's one thing to say there are these things, but the way that you present it is so fascinating, and we learn so much from it. And that, I think, is the importance of the sequential approach, is that there's a lot of thought behind it. You're not just proceeding on automatic pilot, but you're looking at the reasons for why one thing evolves from the next. And also, you're adapting that to your pupils.
Thanks so much for
So,
saying that,
yeah.
reinforcing that's great. And just a reminder, once again, please send me ideas for the repertoire session that's in February, right? Coming up. That's it seems like a far away, but it's coming up soon, and I need to put it together soon.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, we look forward to the next one, and thank you all for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Sure.
Bye
Okay.
for now.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you,
Yeah.
Bob.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.